civil society and the frontline responders and those who are most affected by trafficking really need to be key participants in this conversation and in any solution. And whether we're talking about data, whether we're talking about protection, or even whether we're talking about security and prevention as well. I represent Winrock International, which is an NGO from the US, and we work in 40 countries across the world. We've been working in trafficking since the 1990s, and I currently have a fairly significant presence in Asia, with country programs in Bangladesh, Nepal, Thailand, Laos, and Cambodia. And as Dr. Cohen mentioned in his introduction, I manage a 5-year USAID-funded Asia CTIP program that covers the entire region and is intended to increase the quality and use of learning and data, to facilitate cross-border and regional cooperation, and to develop opportunities for increased leadership by the private sector to tackle TIP in their operations and supply chains. And I think that's also, I think I only heard one of my fellow panelists mention the private sector, but I think when we are talking about trafficking in persons, that's a very important stakeholder that needs to be in this mix. As we know, in this region, the majority of trafficking victims come from the private sector, from labor exploitation. So I think we are remiss if we don't include them in our discussions as well as in our solutions. In our work at Winrock, in all of the TIP work we do, we strive to generate and apply evidence-based solutions to this very complex problem. And we are very fortunate to have an access to a wealth of experience and information coming from the many years that our teams and our partners on the ground have had working directly with those most vulnerable to, those affected by, and those on the front lines trying to reduce TIP. And one other interesting point about our work with data, Jessie mentioned in her presentation IOM's Counter-Trafficking Data Collaborative that is bringing together case information from across the world and working with Liberty Asia and Polaris. Winrock has now joined with the CTDC, this database, to include our case information into that database, and we're very excited about that. And for the reasons that Jessie outlined, it's a really important tool. As I said, we have access to case data and frontline experience and knowledge through our country programs. And we try to support our local partners and their stakeholders to improve rigor in their collection, their record keeping, and their use. At the regional level, we are trying to look at multiple and diverse sources of data and exploring how we can harness our on-the-ground country experience and take this information and this direct source data that our country teams and their partners have collected, and then combine it with sound research and contextual open source data to strengthen prevention and protection, identify and reduce risks, and support the private sector, government, and policymakers. One of the things that we're also trying to do, and I think Jessie referred to this in her comments as well, is to look at how we take this data, how we harness all of these experience, and we look at it beyond what is reporting, what is record keeping, and what is learning. Because there is no point in collecting data, as I think everyone has mentioned, is if we're not using it to strengthen and improve the work that we're doing and better understand the problem that we're trying to grapple with. And I think from civil society perspective, we're very much, almost too much honed in by our reporting requirements and our needs to always make sure that our work is sustainable and to give the donors what they're asking for. And we sometimes forget that, wait a minute, is this helping us to reduce trafficking? And always keeping our real mission at the forefront. I think also I just want to underscore, and again I've heard this from throughout the morning, is that there is good news. And the fact that we're all here today indicates that we've recognized the importance of and the need for robust and rigorous data. That's progress. I think we've also recognized that we still have a long way to go and a lot to learn. And then I think it's critical that we also remember that even with the most sophisticated of technology, methods, and resources, that there are critical questions of bias, ethics, security, ownership, and context. And these can undermine a data effort in any field. In trafficking in persons, as a source, subject, and owners of much of our most valuable data are vulnerable individuals, these risks are even higher and of greater significance. And I think we can't underscore that enough. And I think that's one of the things that's most useful about these guidelines that Jesse has produced. They're really practical, and they keep those questions and those risks at the forefront of our work. We are trying at Winrock very hard to understand and emphasize local engagement in the formulation, communication, and interpretation of our TIP data. As Jesse mentioned, global TIP estimates tend to be made far from the localities where the data upon which they are based are collected, and where the results of the process must ultimately be applied if they are to make any difference at all. International and standardized indicators are necessary, but they're not a substitute for data that meets local needs and addresses local problems. That is, we need data that is both technically and socially robust. And such an approach is critical to increase the likelihood that the data we use is able to be translated by those who are is able to be used by those who are most able to translate it into meaningful solutions over the long term. And I also think it's important that we not only recognize where this data comes from, but we focus on the source of this data. Again, technical and scientific rigor is important, but so is a wide and representative range of sources. And that means exploring methods and standards that can account for and incorporate local knowledge and experience-based information. We need to tap into and learn from various other disciplines that have been doing this and making progress in this with data for a long time, such as public health. One of the examples of what we're doing at Winrock in our work to look at different ways of using and accessing data is our work with one of our partners that Jesse mentioned, Liberty Asia. We're working with them to help companies to expand their view on how they can address TIP in their business by looking not only at their workers and their processes, but at their finances and business relationships to see where their legitimate business interests intersect with illicit economic activity tied to labor exploitation and to human trafficking. And then lastly, another significant barrier that we face, and everyone has mentioned this morning, is the willingness and ability to share knowledge and information. Clearly, this is not a problem that's unique to the counter-trafficking in persons community, but it is a critical one, and we really need to address it. Also, I think that everyone here has mentioned the potential and the opportunity that ACTIV presents, the work of the SOMPC leading ASEAN's work to enforce and implement ACTIV is critical. I think the collection and application of data is a real opportunity for ASEAN to present a model for the region and beyond in anti-trafficking. But to fulfill this promise, I think all of the member states and actors are going to need to engage stakeholders across and within their own governments and throughout the region. And they're going to, as I mentioned from the beginning, reach out beyond their governments as well to make sure all of those actors who are involved and have a stake in reducing trafficking also have a voice in the solutions and decision-making going forward. So with that, I'm going to just thank Jessie for her work. I think it's going to be very useful, and I look forward to sharing it with my colleagues on the ground, and thank the organizers for this event and for inviting me.